Welcome back to Qtronics, and today something very different. Now, recently Mobapad reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to try out their N1 HD pad, and as I've never actually reviewed a product on my channel before or anything properly, and I thought, yeah, it's something I'd like to do. I did look at the specs before agreeing, and I was actually really impressed. It sounds like a really top-notch pad, and spoiler alert, I do think it is genuinely a top-notch pad. I'm really impressed with it. So I will cut over to some little box opening video at some point. When I opened the box, I did go on a long time about the controller, just from the feel. And I think really you want to know more about the controller than just the feel. So I will go over that a bit now. Anyway, so yeah, first things first, here's a look at the pad. And now I actually regret immediately getting it in black, because when I looked through the site again afterwards, I realised I did a pink model. And I would have quite liked to have gotten the pink model, because I could have then given this to my wife to play, because I've got a Pro controller, but she doesn't, so obviously it'd be nice. But never mind, the black is fine. Now, when I mentioned in the video, when I first opened it, the feel of it, it feels great. As you can see, there's a like knurling on the back here for anti-slip. Your two back buttons and then all the rest of your buttons. The triggers obviously are just straight buttons because it's made for the Nintendo Switch, and the Switch doesn't support analog triggers. It would have been nice for them to be analog triggers, as they do give you a 2.4 gigahertz dongle in the box, which can be used with a PC and other devices. It obviously does have Bluetooth as standard, so it can work with Android and iOS as well, which is great. And for those who don't like the disc D-pad, which I'm not a fan of it, they do give you the normal D-pad. So I've obviously put the disc back on here just to show you guys, but normally I would be playing with the D-pad. First things first, let's actually go over some of the features before we get into it. And you'll be pleased to know it features Hall effect joysticks. So there's going to be no stick drift on this controller. These joysticks are going to last longer than the Switch is going to last at this point now. But yeah, these are great. They do also have anti-wear resistant rings. Now, they're not obviously metal, or they don't look metal coloured. But Moba did say they're diamond wear resistant. So basically, you're going to be able to do this all day long, spinning, spinning, spin. It's one of those games where you've got to do this. I think back to some of the old fighting games where you used to have to spin the stick. You know, maybe even a Dragon Ball Z game in the future, hopefully. But yeah, that feels great. And the sticks themselves feel so smooth. Honestly, I think they feel smoother than the Switch controller, which I do have one here. These, I mean, you can hear it for one, how it scrapes. Now, that's just because it's an older controller. But honestly, let's get rid of that a second. Honestly, the joysticks feel amazing on this. They feel so smooth. There's so little resistance. Now, if that's what you want, that's great. Obviously, you want more resistance. I don't know, but honestly, I've not had an issue with any of these sticks. They just feel absolutely perfect in the hand. Now, when we come on to the buttons as well, they're calling them liquid silicon, and they say they're basically suitable for 5 million button presses. So let's keep going for it for a very long time before you break a button. Probably, again, it's going to last longer than most consoles at this point now. The Switch, obviously, coming into its final year, but this controller, as it supports Bluetooth, should support the Switch too. Theoretically, who knows? But overall, great controller. The feel, it just feels nice. Now, when it comes to controllers, sometimes you can buy cheap controllers. Not that this is cheap. We can buy third-party controllers is what I meant, and they feel really light and horrible. This doesn't. This genuinely just feels nice in the hand. And the finish on the top is an anti-smudge finish. You can see there's no fingerprints left there. And it's very reminiscent of the Xbox One controller's finish. So if you like that finish, it just feels like that. It feels absolutely beautiful in the hand. Honestly, it feels great. And then the final two other big features, just for the controller alone, before we get into any macros or anything, is it has HD rumble, and also it has a 6-axis gyroscope. So any of those games on the Switch that need you to wiggle the pad around to do stuff, Zelda for example, you can do that with this. Not that if you're wearing a pad and want to do that, but you've got the option there. And when it comes to the HD rumble, they're obviously they're intended to be exactly like how the Pro controller is. So there's a special little feature you can do on them, where when you go in the app, you can actually say there's some theme tunes that you can download. Now, I'm a massive Monster Hunter fan, so what I did is actually put the Monster Hunter theme on. So when we turn the pad on, you'll hear it, hopefully. Now, obviously, hopefully, I really hope you heard that, but that's not a speaker. That is, oh, there you go, it turned itself off. That is the speaker that isn't a speaker, sorry, that is the motors themselves. So just to show you that they are full HD vibration. Honestly, the vibrations on it's great. You can turn it up and down like you can with any other controller. Brilliant. And the fact you can do those little tunes, for me, I don't know, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to stuff like that, and I love the fact that when I turn the control pad on now, it does the little Monster Hunter theme. Now, just before I get into showing you the controller in action, Mobapad did want me to stress a few little things about the connectivity. So they said it supports X input, D input, and Nintendo Pro modes on the PC. So obviously, if it's a controller you want to use against multiple things, that's brilliant. And obviously, like I said before, it's supported on Android and iOS as well. Obviously, a controller that works across all this range of devices is the kind of thing you want, really. But without the analog triggers, for me, you might want to switch it out if you're going to try and use it on like an Xbox or something. If you already have an Xbox, you're probably going to want to use that controller on the PC. Again, unless you're using stuff like Ryujinx and you're playing Switch games on your PC, in which case, perfect controller for it. So anyway then, let's actually get into some game footage and you can see me mapping the buttons and stuff and we'll go from there. There you go. And I just press the home button to turn it on. So like a normal Switch Pro controller, you can actually turn on the device with the pad, which is brilliant. So it's all synced up as you normally would. You press the sync button, go to add controller. So just like you would for anything else, controllers, pair a new controller. It works exactly like you'd expect a Switch controller to work. There's no faffing around with it. It does support USB-C as well, which I forgot to mention. So for anyone out there who cares, which I do, USB-C. None of this micro USB nonsense. So right, obviously now we're into Monster Hunter Rise now. Let me just go and jump onto a quest, and I'll show you mapping some of these buttons. So again, as you can see, I'd say I've got, you know, average size hands. I wouldn't say I've got massive hands or anything, and the controller itself looks really comfortable in my hands. I'm not having to struggle, to be honest. If we compare it to the Pro controller, I think the layout on the M1 HD is actually much better than the Pro controller from Nintendo. So yeah, take that. So there is macro function on this. Obviously, as we've got the two back buttons, but there's also turbo mode. So to activate turbo mode, it's very simple. We press this button down here, which is the settings button, and the button that you want to actually activate. So first of all, if I get us to a point where we can throw some knives, so I'm going to hold the settings button and Y, and then now if I hold Y down, you can see red lights flashing, and I'm holding Y, and it's going to just keep hitting the button. So obviously, if you're in a game, an intensive game where you've got to keep mashing a button, this makes a big difference for that. If you tap it again, now it becomes one press on, one press off, which is really, really useful. And then if we tap it again, the macro's disappeared completely. Now that macro will work on any button on the surface. So all these buttons here, the two triggers. So obviously that's where it comes to macros. Now, before we get into mapping buttons sorry, there you go, that's for turbo. Obviously we can do macros as well, so I'll show you in a second. Before we get into it though, I watched someone else's video on this because I'd seen the controller before I'd actually said yes to it, and they had an issue with the app. I want to tell you now up front, the app works wonders now. We can connect to the control pad. So first of all, I'm going to create a macro on the control pad, and then I'm going to show you that macro in the app that you can edit and send it back here. So if we just do a simple macro here, first of all, we have to hold the settings button down for 4 seconds until it goes purple, and then we're in macro mode. So if we tap this, 1, 2, 3, and then loose that, and then we tap the button we want, so back left button. So now if we tap that, there you go, you can see the macro is activated there. So there you go, really simple set of macros from the controller. Now, one of the things that will happen is if you have got turbo settings on there, they will disappear when you turn the controller off. Now, that obviously used to be a problem with the controller, but now the app is working and it's working great. We can actually set up profiles on the app. So if you head over to the app, you can see the app has an option for all of the controllers that they support. Obviously, we have the M1 HD. Connect to the pad. I've already connected this obviously before. And as you can see, I've already created some pre-configurations. And now we can actually see that MOBA has some configurations here for you to start already. So if we have Breath of the Wild, we have Monster Hunter Rise, which this is for planting bombs. And we also have other ones that are shared down here. And the sound sharing, if you can see there, is actually I've got my rumble motors to make the official Monster Hunter theme tune, which is here. and that's great. So if we actually go back to one that I already messed with earlier on, called Qtronics, one I made earlier, we can see I've actually turned the turbo off on everything, but from here we can turn the turbo on everything. We can also go to the map. We can give this a macro. So while we've got the controller, if we hold L2, you can see that every time we press the button, it's popping up. So if I do L1 and then Y, 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 I can then save the macro from here. And you can see the macro is now there. I can remap this back button here to be whatever button I press. So I'm going to make it X, press OK. There we go. Sound, as I said previously, that's got that sound on there. So if I edit that, you can actually map a sound wherever you want. And then you've got vibration settings, obviously strong on both of them for me personally. So if we save that now, and then we can apply it to the controller, and then we should now have my macro set up. So every button should also be turboed, which is, as you can see here, red light. Every button is set to turbo. Obviously, we can still turn those off manually like we did before. And then hopefully we should also have that macro set up. So if I press that back button, there you go, you can see I've mapped it to the right back button. So if we look down here, when I press it, there you go, it opens it up, and then we should get 4 Ys. And there you go, that's it. It's so simple to set up, and the fact you can use the app to create your macros is even better, because when you create one and send it over to the app, send it back, you haven't got to mess about setting up your macros every time. You can have loads of different games already preset in the app, like I said, and then send them to the controller. You can send on all of the turbo features immediately up front. One thing that they do mention is when you turn off the controller, you lose your turbo parts. Now that makes sense. I imagine the turbo isn't saved. But with the configuration, it's just as simple as applying it next time you jump on, which is, again, nice and easy. As you can see, there's no issues when it comes to playing the game. The joysticks feel absolutely beautiful. And when it comes to a game like Monster Hunter, where you need that input and you need the camera changes, having those back buttons actually not mapped to macros, but mapped to other buttons will come in really handy, because sometimes when you're trying to attack and swipe, getting onto a trigger then becomes a bit more difficult, whereas actually using those back buttons to map makes more sense. So yeah, overall, I'm really happy with the controller. So there you go. And obviously you want to know the price of the controller. Currently it's coming in at $45.99, which is around about £38 mark. Obviously in my description I'll leave links to the shop so you can go and have a look at the price and stuff. But honestly, for that sort of price, this controller is absolutely great. I have no issues with it, and I think it's one of these controllers that are going to last a long time. And like I said, I personally think it's better than the Pro Controller by Nintendo. I just think this feels so plastic, and this was so expensive when it first came out. And this one just feels more premium, for lack of a better thing. There's no metal on it that you can see, but because of the anti-slip on the back, the buttons feel nicer. The buttons on the Switch one stick out too much for me personally, whereas these, they're in your hand, ready to go. Triggers feel strong. Just everything feels where it should be. And again, I'm not a fan of the disc D-pad, but the fact they give you the normal D-pad in the box as well is great. Some people do really like these, so obviously each to their own. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining us. That is the N1 HD controller, which again, I think is really good. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you play the Nintendo Switch with a controller normally, or are you someone that just gets out the Joy-Cons and plays with them, or only plays handheld? Obviously, I'm someone who plays a lot of handheld, but when I sit down banging on the telly, I do like to have a proper controller. I can't use the Joy-Cons in that weird little strappy thing. Oh, it's too small. So I like to have a nice controller. Anyway, guys, thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.